Okay, hi, it's
Hi.
Frank, and I'm here talking to Annette Stein. This is one of my conversations or interviews, whatever you really want to call it, or whatever I really want to call it. I don't really know what they are. They're kind of just friendly conversations. But it's all around the idea of the stories of our lives, which is a project that I'm getting really fascinated by, and just trying to connect people through the fact that we might have different opinions and we might believe different things, but we're still all made of stories. I increasingly have come to believe that as I got older. And stories, by definition, have some relationship to the world and have some relationship to something that's factual, but they're also largely made up as well. So that's really brilliant when you actually think about it. And if that's true, one of the things that fascinates me, that if there's a bit of fiction in every story, then we have the potential to rework that fiction, edit it, and maybe, as I get older and I approach my 50th birthday in January, one of the things I've spent a lot of time thinking about and telling bad stories, and I've done with that now. I want to tell good stories, because I think, if you have a choice, why would you choose to tell a bad story and spread all that shit around? You know what I mean? Sorry to swear, but that's very much how I feel at the moment. I feel really quite strongly about it. So this project is about trying to connect people, not because certain people are brilliant and or anything like that. No judgment. It's just interesting people, all of us in the same boat, because we're all trying to navigate through our lives. And we do that through telling stories to each other, telling stories to ourselves. Some of them are really good, some of them are a bit self-limiting, but sometimes it's difficult to know which is which. I don't know how that all works, so I'm not here to teach you anything. All I'm really here to do is just to talk to different people, and just hopefully we can create some cool energy. So I've got Annette with me, who I've known for 12 years, and I'm going to let you speak in a minute, honestly, I really will. But I'm just going to start this off by saying one of the things that's really fascinated me about doing this, and I've only been doing it for about 3 weeks already, and I've interviewed a few people, is it's made me think of my connection to the person I'm talking to. In what context do I know them? What's the basis of our relationship? And it's been really interesting thinking, very close family members to acquaintances, really, people that I know, maybe because our kids go to the same school or something. It's been really, really interesting to have a look at that, and then actually from that look at the story I have about that person, and then match it up to what they come and tell me about them, which is really interesting. So I know Annette reasonably well. We've known each other for about 12 years. Annette, I was thinking about, each one of these conversations has gone in a different way, and I really just genuinely don't have any agenda. I haven't made any notes or anything, and it's just what comes up. But one of the things that kept coming up for me when I was going to talk to you was, you've done so much in your life, and you've accumulated so much kind of insight and wisdom, and without necessarily focusing on any one of those stories, as compelling as they all are, your time, we've spent Christmases together when you've told me about things you've done in the 70s in London. You were in some situations, and and they're brilliant. And anybody, listen, if you can pin Annette down at any point and get her to tell you some of these stories, it's a really good thing, because they're just brilliant. But I think what I wanted to start off with was just where you are now in your life, and you kind of look back. I look at you as someone that has has just a really gentle energy, but has some deep wisdom. And do you feel that if I throw that to you and I say that to you, does that resonate with you? Do you feel like a person that has got to a point in their life where they feel, I've got a handle on something, I've got an insight into something? Do you feel like that?
Yes, absolutely.
You do? Yeah.
100%.
And so in that respect, it's like, how do you, when you look back, how does that make you feel in terms of what you can achieve now, as opposed to maybe, if in the past, if you didn't have that wisdom, what you could have done, from now, how do you feel like you can take that forward and share it?
It's interesting, because it's interesting listening to you say that, because I don't well, sometimes I get caught up in thinking about stories of my life, but tend to not get caught up in thinking about so much. I can go back in a memory if someone has a conversation with me,
Yeah.
and I can pull a memory forward.
Yeah.
That my description of that memory in the story is actually the truth of what actually happened at that time.
Right, absolutely,
My
yeah.
memory of it, and how I think about it from who I am today.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I totally love that. That you know, that happens so often when I'm in class, and just, you know, everything we go back into a memory. Yeah, we pull that memory up, and that's that story. If we're not careful, the emotion gets wrapped up in the story, and that becomes the kind of truth. And it's not that it's not connected to something that happened, but it's like, you know, it just it has an element of fiction about it, isn't it? You're selecting details, and that's really interesting.
Yeah.
So I know that you've got you know, you've got a project going on at the moment, and you've got you know, you've got into a really cool space. Can you talk about the listening space, because I think that's really exciting, and I'm quite excited for you about it, and where you've got to. And can you talk about the listening space and what you're trying to achieve through that? That'd be really interesting, I think.
Yeah. Well, the listening space is just kind of an umbrella term for my practice, really, or my clinic that I have here. And I've come across something called the 3 principles, which is just an understanding of how we work as human beings. Very, very simple. And it's interesting because you said to me, you know, I've had years of self-development, endless stories I can tell you about the endless things that I've done to try and develop myself. And today I've realised actually myself doesn't need developing.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
I've come to an understanding that actually all that work, my wisdom has just been waiting inside of me to be found.
That's brilliant. Yeah.
It's not possible to develop who I am, my wisdom.
Right.
I could develop my intellect.
Yeah.
I can develop my knowledge. I can develop, you know, that part of myself. But the thing that I think I was searching for in all those years has always been sitting there waiting for me just to look at it.
I love that. I really, that really resonates with me. And I think I'm just going to kind of jump in and say, you know, I think nowadays with social media, you know, everybody wants to tell you how to live, and everybody wants to give you, you know, you want to be a better lover, then follow these 12 steps. And it's kind of like, I get your point that, you know, you can always learn things, and that's the different thing. You can learn a new skill, but fundamentally we're okay inside. We don't need fixing. This is such an important thing. We all think we're a bit screwed up. We all think we're a bit dysfunctional, I start to think, because I think we get bombarded with negative images in the media, and everything's going to hell in a handcart, and, you know, people get so wrapped up into that. But actually I think human beings are really tenacious. I think we have an amazing capacity to connect with each other. And I think if we listen to that inner voice, I think there's so much noise nowadays, isn't there? So much noise, and it's almost like we can't hear ourselves, our own inner brilliance. If we could just be quiet for a bit and understand that, you know what, a lot of the time you absolutely know what to do.
Yes. Yeah.
You speak into that.
You don't even have to necessarily meditate to get to that.
Yeah, right.
You meditate if you feel good and it makes you feel good, great, but that's not the thing that will take you to that place. That place is just there. It is inside us in every moment. And I think it's only there in the moment. We can't try and memorize something to get us back to that feeling. And
right.
With the listening space, it's like, I called it the listening space because I spend a time really listening to people like you are. I'm listening, and then maybe pointing them in a direction of what it is they're looking for, and pointing.
I love that. Yeah.
Not broken. We're not broken. None of us are broken. We just think we are. We just believe we are. We have stories made up in our heads that we're broken. And when we have the stories made up in our heads, then we have a lot of feelings of anxiety or stress or whatever that follows the stories. And that's it, really. It's just pointing out to a place where that we're underneath all of that. There is an amazing space that we can get to easily. Yeah,
it's so cool. I think what's interesting, again, I think, you know, is that there aren't any mantras to do. There's no, you know, you don't have to sit like a Zen Buddha for hours to get into this space. I think what you're pointing to is so fascinating, because it's like, you know, it's there. we have a kind of inner peace. I know it sounds fluffy for some people, but that might be watching that haven't really been exposed to that kind of thinking. But you know what, if you just, you know, for me, it's there's something Sid Banks said. Sid Banks was a really interesting guy that was, you know, just, and like any of us, just an ordinary guy going about his life. He was a welder, he had a job, you know, everything, and he had a bit of an epiphany one day, and he's a really interesting character. I really recommend you go and look him up. And Sid Banks said something that I really love, and I mentioned this yesterday to Amanda, and he said that humility isn't thinking of less of yourself, it's thinking of yourself less. And I always loved that. That really hooked me when I first heard that quote, because the way I interpret that in terms of what you were just saying in there is that, you know, we get so, you know, thinking of yourself less is like, we get so focused on the reality of our stories, the truth of our stories, and how they're so real and true, and they pull us in a direction. You know, that person, you know, did this thing, so that therefore they're disrespecting you, and you have to, you know, all of this thing, this bill's coming through the door, so I've got to act. It's not that they don't have some factual basis, but it's like the stories we create about these things in our heads. It just, you know, it just takes us out of that possibility of feeling that inner space that you're talking about, I think, isn't it? We're so wrapped up in the emotion of these stories. Yeah. And when we drop that, when we take them less seriously, and what I think one of the things I'm trying to do is just to suggest to everybody, and just to remind myself really, that all of our stories have an element of fiction in them. And, you know, I'm increasingly believing that element of fiction is quite large. You know what I mean?
I would say it's not just an element, it's the whole story.
Right.
Now,
you know,
the whole story of my how many years have gone past, or before me in the past, is fiction. It's total fiction now.
Yeah. Because let's bring in, we're in the moment right now, and we're just sitting here talking, and, you know, the past, it has a reality in our heads, but that's a different thing from us sitting here right now, isn't it? It's that's really interesting. So explain a little bit more. You know, how does it actually work? You've created this, you know, this idea. I know that you've done good work because I've experienced it myself. Can you explain some, you know, kind of what people would get if they, you know, if they come and see you? How does it work with you?
Well, it would be often people come and see me because normally people aren't coming to see me because they're really happy and their lives are
right.
That would be, unless they wanted cranial sacral session for relaxation, but even then they would be feeling some stress to come for that. So, normally people come to see me because they are either having stress, anxiety, kind of despair, any of the things that they would like. I feel like they need soothing, to want of a better word.
Right. Yeah, that's absolutely it. Yeah.
Different perspective on how they can manage their lives in whatever, whether it's physical, whether it's mental or emotional. And they come and we just sit and we have conversations.
Yeah.
And again, I will point them in, through the conversation, they'll get their own insights, and as they're talking to me, I help them with an understanding that actually it's a story that they're making up about their lives. Pointing them in a different direction, getting them to look in a different direction, into maybe away from so much thought, so much making up stories, into a different place in themselves. And through that conversation, they start to get their own insight and their own wisdom about how to solve what difficulties are going on for them. And I'll follow that up. I do cranial sacral body work, and I'll follow that up with a body listening session.
Right.
It's very relaxing and integrative.
It's a fascinating thing, isn't it? I think you know that that what you know that do it sounds really simplistic, and it actually is. I think that's the thing. We're constantly kind of, you know, you got to do a 12-step program, you got to do this, you got to do this, come to the, you know, sign up for me here. And I think what's really interesting about what you're saying is that actually there's not really much to do. It's just, it's just a different understanding. And you like you're saying, pointing them in a slightly different direction, pointing people in a slightly different direction and saying, just, you know, it's getting to a space of trust, really, isn't it? It's getting to a space where you can trust your own calmness and what comes out of that, rather than that really emotionally engaged response to, you know, that reactive kind of, you know, I've got to jump down someone's throat because they, you know, do you know what I mean? It's just that calmness and seeing what's happening largely, and your interpretations, you know, as an element of fiction, you know, just be calm, be in the moment, and just letting something come from that rather than that very reactive, you know, intense emotional, you know, response, I think.
Yeah. It's hard.
So
it's hard sometimes. It's kind of sometimes difficult, like getting put on the spot to describe what it is, but it's probably better to speak to, it's all good to speak to someone that's come and actually experienced the session, would have more of a clarity how it is for them. It's always, I find it kind of difficult to explain how it works, but it's amazing. I mean, I've used my new website. I've got some testimonials on there that people talk about their experiences, how they are on it, and that makes it really clear.
But I know I've got a great idea. Why don't I ask you how it's changed your life?
Yeah, you can do that.
So what happened to you when you kind of, because you said you know you've done a few things before, and we kind of met through a guy called Mick McKenzie, who's just a fantastic person, and has some really cool ideas about self-actualization and everything, but pushing through that, and you know, and getting to the point you were in your life where you had some things happening that were tricky, and then coming across this understanding. Can you talk about that, you know, I don't want to call it a process, but that time and what you saw when you know, as you've been saying, when someone's talking to you and showing you in a new direction, when you experienced that, what opened up for you? What happened?
Yeah, I think I spent many years working with self-actualization, Mick McKenzie. And it's funny, I was talking to somebody about him this morning, and I realized why I never could quite understand that the process of what his work did, but I know that the result was it put me into the present time.
Right.
It put me into what I call present time awareness, and I think that was really useful. And I can look back and see that now, but I don't know how. I've never could quite figure out how we got there with it. Whereas,
right.
I think, and then nearly 4 years ago now, Ian Watson, who's a mentor and teacher of mine, was doing a one day introducing about the three principles,
right?
Mind, consciousness, and thought, and he was just giving a one day talk about it. And I went and sat in this one day with him, and heard him talk. He was doing it with another woman, two of them. Carol was presenting, and I just sat and listened for the whole day. It was in London. And I was like, oh, that's just interesting, common sense, it makes sense. You know, he was talking about how our thoughts, you know, he was talking about thinking, and we create everything through our thinking. Everything is created through our thought process. And so, and then he was saying, so everything we experience in the world, that we see in the world, everything we experience in the world is through our thinking, through our thought process, everything. And I was like sitting and I was like trying to understand it. And then something clicked. I don't know what it was, but something I realized actually it's an inside out thing. It's an inside out. It's like, I suddenly realized I couldn't blame my outside circumstances that were going on outside of me on my inside feelings. It was like a turnaround for me just on that one day. And I thought something about this makes sense. Something about this sits right with me. So, and then I remember walking out. I was with Amanda, my partner at the time, and she came and she didn't understand it. And as we were leaving the day, she turned around to Ian and she was going, what was that all about? And he thought, and she wasn't joking.
Right.
In the same way it clicked with me. However, it was in Regent's Park, and we went and we walked out into Regent's Park, and it was a beautiful sunny day. It was a spring day, and all the flowers were out and everything. As we walked into the park, she just turned around and looked at me, and I looked at her, and there was a moment, and she took hold of my hand, and there was a moment there of, she got what he was talking about, and I got what I was talking about, and it was beyond intellectual understanding. It's like almost like we fell into a place of, I don't know, bliss, and in the moment we were just there. It doesn't kind of make sense, so it sounds a bit fluffy, like you say, but it was a deep understanding. Something from that day fell deeply into me, and I felt something. It was on a feeling, and I followed that feeling, and then I started to follow up, learning a bit more.
Right. Do you know what's really interesting? I just thought, literally, as you were trying to describe that feeling, and it's weird because it's almost like, you know, people spend money to take drugs, and, you know, alcohol or whatever it might be, or, you know, they're taking coke or whatever it is to try to find that high. And actually, you don't need to find that high if you just can calm your stories down and listen to your own wisdom and your own insight. And it's what's really interesting is that, you know, I experienced very much when you drop that story of who you're supposed to be, you know, your ego mind controlling, you know, gotta be like this, gotta be like this, gotta be like this, gotta be better. If you can just drop that, I experienced a huge feeling of coming home.
Yeah.
That was the feeling that I really got. It felt like I'd been away for a long time. I think the way I kind of, you know, try to think about it is that we expend so much energy trying to keep up this front of who we're supposed to be and the story of who we are, and, you know, but it's largely just, it consists of nothing really. It's all in your head, you know what I mean? And when you drop it, suddenly you're just back to you again, that bit of you that's always all right. You know what I mean? That bit that can't be touched, that's deep in there, that whatever your situation, no one can get at. You know what I mean? That kind of core you, that even if you're lying there with a broken leg, there's something still in you that is core you that can't be touched. And I don't know, that's the only way I can explain it. It felt like coming home, which was a beautiful feeling. And it, you know, you just think, wow, people are taking coke and putting shit into their bodies, and with a little bit of work and a little bit of understanding, you can get there and way further as well. You know?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
It's beautiful. It's a cool thing to do. So one of the things I've been doing after, you know, a little bit of a kind of, you know, introduction and a kind of a little bit of a general chat is throwing some questions out. And one of the things, you know, and again, I think we've probably started to cover this already in terms of, you know, what you're saying is very, it's very straightforward, really. There isn't anything to do. There's nothing to buy. It's just a certain kind of understanding. But I'm going to kind of point this question because it seems to be a question I'm really fascinated by. And it's, how do we flourish? What is it to thrive? How do people, you know, I suppose where this question comes from is it's something that I've had since I was in my teens. I would sit down and talk to my parents and say, I don't understand. This is our world. And so many people are unhappy and I don't understand why it's like that. I didn't understand why we weren't all thriving. You know what I mean? And that's followed me right the way through. And I've had a real relationship with that because there have been times when I've seriously been not thriving, you know, and I'm like, I should be thriving, you know, a real kind of intensity. But when I'm out and I'm in a really good space, it's kind of like, it becomes a fascinating question. It's like, how can I help people? Can I help people? I don't know if I can, maybe point in the right direction, but what does that question mean to you? How do we flourish?
Depends what you mean by flourish and thrive. What?
If I said to you, it's really interesting. I've done this a few times where I've said to people in class, what's human flourishing to you? What is it when we thrive? And people throw things and we put them on the board. And it's really interesting. The boards are always different, but they always have a commonality. There'll be things like bliss. There'll be things like harmony. There'll be things like, you know what I mean? And it's like, it's not pinning it down, but it's a ballpark of, we know what we're talking about when we talk about flourishing. Do you know what I mean?
Right,
So I mean, how, you know, can you speak to that? Does that question resonate with you?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure. Thriving. It's a funny word. It's not words that I use that often. Flourish and thrive. Thriving. Yeah. It sounds very human to me, to thrive. When you first said it, I felt like it's not possible to feel flourished and thrived all the time.
Right. Okay.
Because I'm in a human form, and there are times when I feel absolutely flourished, like everything's working,
right?
I feel blissful, or just everything's working. I just feel absolutely okay in that moment.
Yeah.
And then there'll be another moment where I don't feel okay.
Sure.
And that to me feels part of the human condition.
That's real. Yeah.
It's like part of the human condition that we've created so far.
Yeah.
However, since understanding about the three principles, which is a bit what I've been talking about, since understanding, there is underneath not feeling like thriving or not feeling like flourishing. There feels like there's a thread of okayness.
Yeah.
And I might be feeling crap, and I might be feeling down, but there's a depth of understanding that seems to have grounded in me, that I know I'm okay, even though I'm not flourishing.
Really,
in that
really interesting. You've just made something 3D when I had it as a 2D. Do you understand what I'm saying? You've just kind of given it another dimension. That's really interesting, because I've been very much focused on thinking about, you know, how do we get into that flourishing flow? And what you're saying is really fascinating. It's just widened it for me. It's just expanded it, because you're saying, you know what, sometimes you're in a really shit frame of mind, or you might be, you know, weighed down with flu, but you can still be okay. Actually, no, you're not. It's not. You can still be okay. You are still okay.
Okay.
That's really.
You might feel like you're not. You might think that you're not, but you are still okay. And the deeper you go, the understanding for me that I've gone into the depth of understanding the principles is it's enabled that to sort of embedded in me, even on a crappy day. And one of my favorite sayings to me is, "It's okay. Leave it alone. It will settle." Nothing ever stays the same. If you look back at your life, the whole of your life, nothing has ever stayed the same. It's always changed. Everything has moved on. And right now, in this moment, you're okay. I'm okay.
That's really cool. That's really cool. I love that. I've got another question for you.
Okay.
Annette, what are we doing here?
Where?
What are we doing here?
Talking to you on a computer.
What are we doing though?
Talking.
Good. That's present time.
Yeah.
I got another question for you.
Okay.
Annette.
Frank.
What do you want?
What I've got. Everything that I've got right now.
That's really good.
Frank, what do you want?
I'm quite happy. Yeah, I don't want for anything at the moment. Yeah, right. I'm good.
The truth is, Frank, there is only this moment. Right now, all of our needs are being met. Every need. Right now, in this moment, all of our needs are being met in this human form. We want for nothing else in this moment.
Love it.
Now, we may leave this moment in an hour's time and go and have an argument with somebody, or go and eat something that doesn't agree with us, or go and, I don't know, all the million, trillion stories that can happen to us. But right now, in this moment, we're okay. And the deeper we understand our okayness, that's my favourite saying, okayness. Our okayness, we can go into the different places in our lives and carry the okayness with us. That's
really interesting, isn't it? The more I think for me at the moment, because I'm so fascinated, and I've always been so fascinated by story, it's kind of like the more I drop the stories, the more I stay in a reasonably local present time, the more so much stuff comes out of it, the more confident I can be. You know what I mean? It's that the more connective, that's the thing for me, because I've always been someone that's loved to connect. And yet my mind has taken me off and walled me off from people because I've created stories about, you know, my failures or my, you know, perceived judgments by others. And I isolated myself for a lot of years, you know. And it's funny, it's been a real it's like I've said before on these talks, it's been like a 40-year epiphany, you know, coming out and discovering certain things about the way the world works, and thinking about my love of story, but then applying that to my own life, and thinking about the fictional elements of it, which are a lot, you know. And from that, then coming into this point of saying, you know what, now I just want to roar. I just want to roar, and I want to share myself. Do you know what I mean?
Right. Just going back to what you said a moment ago about connection, what occurred to me was, it's like, for a connection for me, it's like we can connect ourselves to our thinking all the time, which is what we do.
Yeah.
We connect ourselves to our stories and our thinking mind and the thoughts that run through our head all day long.
Okay.
But there's a different connection, and the connection to ourselves that lies underneath that is what will enable us to connect to everyone around us.
Yeah. Yeah,
that's the connection I believe people are looking for. But first, it has to start with ourselves.
I love that. Yeah. I really love that. I think what's fascinating is that, you know, I mean, this has been very different because you're in a very different space, I think, to some of the other people I've spoken to. I think you're really in alignment with what you're trying to do, and that's really interesting. I've wanted to focus on that. I really wanted to talk about that, and not so much talk about, you know, I've talked about backstories with some people, and that's been really interesting as well.
That's fun.
Yeah, no, it's been really good, but it's just, I think you seem like someone that's so in the moment now, and just taking it as it comes.
Sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes, and sometimes not. Yeah. What, you know, do you sit where you are and say, you know, I want to do this with the listening space, or are you just really cool with it and just saying, I've created something and we'll just take it forward as we go? Yeah.
There could be a tendency to want to make it happen and loads of people to come in, but actually no, I'm not really going down that route at all. I am fairly relaxed with it. I've created my website. It took me 9 months.
Right.
I've created my Facebook page, and I've got got this lovely woman that's working with me on marketing. And I'm just going to put myself out there. I'm available.
Yeah.
Now, I'm available. I can do Skype sessions like this, Zoom sessions.
Yeah.
I'm available. I'm here. It's the first time I've actually started to, in a few years, put myself out saying, hey world, I've got something to share. I've got something I can assist, possibly, if you are distressed in any way. I have, you know, come and try what I've got.
It's fantastic. I love it. And you absolutely should. You're shining like a beacon, and it's a really good thing. I love it. Thank you so much. You know, I'm trying to keep these sessions reasonably tight so that it's not too, you know, it doesn't go for too long, but I'm really grateful that you kind of shared what you're doing, because it is fantastic what you do. And I really want you to share it with everybody, because you really genuinely can point people in the right direction. And that the word that comes back, and it's in my head now, and for anybody that's watching, soothing. I think when you said soothing, it was a tuning fork, a perfect pitch. You know what I mean? You know, when I've worked with you, it's been total soothing. It's a beautiful word to use, and it really is kind of, you know, apart from the other things, the kind of emotion of it is a real soothing sense that you give.
Yeah.
So, you know,
I think once we're soothed and quietened down, then we know what to do with our lives.
You can hear it, can't you? You have space. Michael Neal wrote that book, The Space Within, and it's almost like you have to quieten that story, though. If you're on social media and you're flicking down, and your brain is wired so intently to the next thing that it's going to fill the space with, you're not going to be able to hear that stuff we've been talking about, that thing that we don't know but we know is in there. But once you start to let that drop and you start to quieten that background noise, suddenly you start to hear it, or you start to feel it, and it's a totally different space. It is beautiful. Thank you so much. I'm really grateful you spent some time, and I'll see you soon.
Okay, Bye.
Thank you. Bye. See you later. I'm going to learn how to turn it off. It's up here.